Thank you for being here. This is Module 6. We are 3/4 of the way done with our modules. We only have 2 more modules, which we will cover next week. And in Module 6, we are going to now be talking about risk management, and that's planning for what might go wrong, and also mitigation. Not only do we want to plan for it, but have a way to deal with it when problems do come up. And just as a bridge from what we covered in our last module, we discussed creating timelines. And we talked about the differences between our work breakdown structure and a timeline. And on a timeline is where we have kind of a broader, it's a visualization of the work that needs to be done as opposed to a detailed breakdown. And now we're going to focus on identifying risks and how we assess their impact and how we plan our response. Some of the key concepts we're going to talk about today are risk identification and assessment and mitigation strategies. So why does this matter? Because we can't prevent what we can't anticipate, and we can't respond effectively unless we've prepared. This module is going to prepare you for completing component 4 of your project plan. And just a reminder, at this point, you should be preparing for next week and have a rough draft of components 1 through 4. We're going to start out by taking a look at another one of Adriana Girdler's videos. And this one is a project manager's guide to creating a risk register. It's actually broken up into 3 parts, and we're going to focus on this one video for the entire module because I think there's enough information here that we can discuss and reflect on. So first, we're just going to watch parts 1 and 2, and once we've discussed that and we've reflected on that, we'll watch part 3. In part 1, she talks about how we identify risks and the causes and the effects. And in part 2, she's going to talk about creating a probability and impact matrix and how to prioritize which risks need our attention. What is a risk assessment and what is the purpose of it? Do you need them for your projects? What should go on a risk register? What do you think is important to have on there? Is it everything that can go wrong or just certain things that could go wrong? And how would you go about deciding what should be on that? Yeah, so we want to have what the risk is, the potential causes, and how it would affect the outcome of our project. And how many should you identify for your project plan? As many as we can? Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's something that should be an ongoing process. We're never really done with that because there's new risks are emerging all the time. I would recommend that, though, that you focus on the most impactful risks. If you start getting too many and that matrix starts getting too full, it might lose some of its effectiveness. And specifically for your project plans, I would recommend maybe the top 3 to 5 risks that you can identify and rank them in a matrix. I think that would probably be the most useful. You probably also want to think about how likely, what's the probability of these different things happening. Now I'd like you to reflect on this. So at the top of your page, on a fresh page, you're going to write the module number, today's date, reflection 1, and then below that write my approach to identifying and ranking risks for my project. Remember that in component 4, you're going to be asked to identify maybe 3 to 5 risks. So you're going to focus on the things that could really derail your project, not everything that could possibly go wrong. So think about your project specifically, and how are you going to identify what the biggest threats would be to the successful delivery of your project? And how will you assess that? So take around 8 minutes to give that some thought and write in your journals. And as always, it's not about having a right or a wrong answer. It's just that you're thinking strategically and creatively. All right. So if you haven't finished, you can continue writing. And I do encourage that. But now let's move on to the second part of the video, which is part 3. This will be where Adriana talks about creating a mitigation and contingency strategy. Think about what's the difference between mitigation, which is preventing the risk, and creating a contingency plan for dealing with if the risk actually occurs. Why is it important to have a contingency plan? Right, so having the contingency plan means that you're already prepared before it even happens. And how is that different from mitigation? Exactly, right. Does everyone agree with that? So mitigation is actually preventing something from going wrong. So by doing the risk analysis and the risk assessment, we can actually think, oh, this might go wrong, so what am I going to do in an attempt to not let that happen in the first place? And then a contingency plan is, well, but what if in spite of that, something still happens? So both are important, right? We need to have both. Clearly, if we can mitigate and keep a problem from happening, it's better than having to implement a contingency plan. What do you think? For each of your top 3 to 5 risks that you identify, do you think you need both a mitigation plan and a contingency plan, or will it depend on what the risk is? So you think it depends? Yeah. So you don't think you would always need to mitigate a risk that you identify? So Brigesh is suggesting that if he has a mitigation plan, he doesn't necessarily need a contingency plan. Would you all agree with that? I wonder if there shouldn't be a contingency plan even with the mitigation plan. Does a mitigation plan rule out the possibility of that risk happening? So you're suggesting having a plan B is always necessary, always a good idea. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know that you're wrong, Brigesh. I'm not suggesting that you are. And like you're saying that it depends on the situation, what the risk is, and without knowing the risk, you don't really know. And that very well is true, but it's the sort of thing that we want to think about, right? We want to think about, do I always need a plan B? Do I always need a contingency plan? When do I need a plan B? When do I need a contingency plan? It's food for thought. And how detailed do you think your contingency plans and your mitigation plans, how far should you go with these for your case studies? As detailed as we can be, yeah. Well, that's probably good advice. Would everyone agree with that? Let's go ahead and reflect on this. So again, on a fresh page, write reflection 2 at the top of the page, and below that, my mitigation and contingency strategies. Think about and reflect on how you will approach thinking about analyzing what your risks are and how you will apply a mitigation plan and a contingency plan to address the various risks that you've identified. So take around 8 minutes, just write creatively on that, and just just show your thinking on that. Again, if you have more to write, please continue writing. But what we covered today is going to help you complete component 4 of your project plan. And that's to do a 3-part risk assessment, which includes the what, why, and the impact, a probability matrix for your top 3 to 5 risks, and your strategic approach to how you will deal with risks in your project through contingency planning and mitigation strategies. And maybe not all risks need both, as Brugesh suggested. I think that's valid, something that we need to think about. So now your risk register is ready to be drafted. Basically, we've covered everything for the first 4 components of your project plan. You should have these first 4 components in a draft form. They don't need to be finished yet. You're still going to have plenty of time to finalize them. But you should bring in a draft of these first 4 components to next class. That will help me see what you're doing and give you some feedback so that the final report that you do will have the right amount of detail, the right amount of strategic thinking. And remember to go back and forth as you start working on your work breakdown structure and defining your timeline. You might realize, oh, well, my scope is too big. You can adjust the scope, what's in and what's out. Maybe simplify your project a little bit. The important thing is that this is a cohesive document that you're going to create. And your guide is the final deliverable. We don't want it to be over 10 pages. I think 6 to 8 pages is probably going to be like the sweet spot. So make sure that whatever you're doing, you could describe everything in enough detail, but not write more than that amount. And I don't know if that seems like an overwhelming amount even in itself, but if you think you're only writing 1 to 2 pages, 1.5 pages on each one of these components, that's not that much, really. You need to be pretty focused on your project plan to do it justice in that amount of space. In our next session, we're going to talk about communication and team management and information flow and coordination and all of that. So I look forward to seeing you for our next module.